She asked only for a room for the night. What she carried with her would bring down the whole town. The thunder came first. It rolled across the desert flats like the warning of something old and angry, shaking the windows of Coyote Ridge long before the rain arrived. Lightning split the sky in pale forks over the mesa, and for a moment the whole town was lit up white. The crooked church steeple, the water trough caked with dust, the row of dark storefronts with their shuttered eyes. Then darkness again. Inside the house at the end of Miller Street, a man named Amos Greer sat at his kitchen table with his hands flat on the wood listening. He was a cattle rancher, 53 years old, with land that had been in his family since before the territory had a name. His wife had gone to bed an hour ago. His children were grown and scattered. He was alone the way old men are alone in the small hours with only the sound of the storm for company. The knock came at his front door just after midnight. He didn't answer right away. Men didn't come calling at midnight in Coyote Ridge unless they had business that couldn't wait, and business that couldn't wait was rarely good. But the knock came again, 3 sharp raps, patient and certain, and Amos pushed back from the table. 2 men stood on his porch. He didn't know their names, but he recognized the type. Big through the shoulders, hats pulled low, badges absent from their shirts. The kind of men Sheriff Marcus Dodd kept close and quiet. "Evening, Mr. Greer," the taller one said. Amos didn't reply. "Sheriff wanted us to check on you, make sure everything's all right." "Everything's fine," Amos said. "Go home." The second man smiled. It was not a pleasant thing to see. "Well, now that's good to hear, because the sheriff's been thinking about your property, that lower 40 acres along the creek, thinking it might suit him to purchase it. It's not for sale." The tall man sighed like he'd been expecting this. "That's a shame, it really is." He stepped forward. "We'll give you a fair price, Mr. Greer. And if you reconsider by the end of the week, well, the sheriff's a patient man." Then the second man hit him. Amos went down hard, his shoulder catching the door frame. He lay on the porch boards, staring up at the sky, while rain began to fall in cold drops, and the 2 men walked away without hurrying, their boots crunching steady on the wet earth. He lay there a long time after they were gone. In the morning, he would sign the transfer papers. He told his wife it was his decision. He told her he'd gotten a fair price. She looked at his bruised jaw and said nothing. The stage from Tucson arrived just past noon the next day, cutting through the last of the storm's muddy aftermath and rattling to a stop in front of the express office with a wheeze of exhausted horses. The driver climbed down to change animals. 2 passengers disembarked before the final one, a woman in black who stepped down from the coach with the careful deliberateness of someone accustomed to carrying things that could not be set down. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She was 29 years old and she had been traveling for 11 days. The dress she wore was morning black good wool once, but faded now at the cuffs and collar. Her hair was dark and pinned tightly beneath a hat that had seen better weather. She carried a single carpet bag, worn smooth at the handle, and a smaller leather satchel pressed close against her ribs beneath her arm. She stood on the board sidewalk of Coyote Ridge and looked at the town the way a person looks at something they are deciding whether to fear. The town looked back. It was not a large place, one main street, maybe 4 blocks end to end, with a church at one end and a saloon at the other, and the rest of human commerce squeezed between. The Grand Hotel sat mid-block with its peeling facade and sagging porch. The general store, the express office, the barber shop, a law office with its shingle hanging crooked in the last of the wind. A dog barked twice and fell silent. Eleanor adjusted the satchel strap and walked. She had come to Coyote Ridge looking for a man named Victor Crane. She had other reasons too, a cousin-in-law of her late husband, James Marsh, who was said to have settled in the territory 3 years prior. She had written him letters that went unanswered, and she had held on to the possibility of him the way a person holds on to the last lamp in a dark house, carefully, not quite trusting it. But if James was gone, she would manage that. She had learned to manage. It was Victor Crane she needed. Crane was a mine inspector. He had been appointed by the territorial government 18 months ago to conduct safety assessments on the active silver and copper operations across Arizona. He had inspected the Silver Crown mine outside Tucson on the 14th of March, 1883. He had filed a report certifying the mine sound and fit for continued operation. 6 weeks later, the main tunnel collapsed. 11 men died in the earth. Her husband, Daniel, was among them. Eleanor had stood in the church and listened to the priest speak of God's will and mercy, and she had kept her face still and her hands folded, and inside she had been burning. Because she had Daniel's letters. She had read them so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. He had written to her about the timbers, the way they were rotting, the way the foreman ignored complaints, the way the mine owner, a man named Aldous Webb, seemed to know and not to care. He had written that an inspector was coming and that maybe things would change. Then Victor Crane had come and gone and nothing had changed, and 6 weeks after that, Daniel was dead. Eleanor had spent 4 months trying to learn where Crane had gone after the inspection. She had written letters to the territorial office in Prescott. She had spoken to a lawyer in Tucson who told her there was nothing to be done, that Crane's report was filed in good faith, that mine collapses were acts of God and not of men. She had sold most of her furniture to pay for the lawyer. She had sold Daniel's good boots and his Sunday jacket and the silver watch his father had left him. Then a woman named Clara Pitts, a boarding house keeper in Tucson, who had known Daniel, who had watched Eleanor grieve for those 4 months, had told her something. She had heard Clara said from a freighter who stopped regular that there was a mine inspector working out of Coyote Ridge now, doing property assessments, not mine work, but you know how men like that are, they go where the money is. His name was Crane, Victor Crane. Eleanor had packed her bag that same night. Yeah. The Grand Hotel refused her at the desk without meeting her eyes. She was a widow traveling alone, the clerk explained, and they had policies. The Territorial Inn said they were full. Mrs. Morrison's boarding house said the same. Eleanor stood on the sidewalk outside the last door and let the afternoon sun beat down on her and did not allow herself to feel what she wanted to feel. She was tired. Her feet hurt from the new boots she'd bought in Tucson to replace the ones that had given out. She had not eaten since breakfast, and breakfast had been a hard biscuit from the stage stop at Cabrillo. She was standing there recalculating when she heard the sound. Small, close, almost hidden under the noise of the street. She looked down. A girl of perhaps 8 years was sitting against the base of the hitching post, her knees pulled to her chest and her face turned away. She was wearing a dress that had once been blue and was now the color of the town, faded, dusty, worn soft at the edges. She was crying without making much noise about it, which was the kind of crying that suggested long practice. Eleanor crouched down. It was an awkward thing in a long skirt, but she managed it. "Are you hurt?" she asked. The girl shook her head. "Are you lost?" The girl was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know where I am." "That's different from being somewhere you want to be," Eleanor said. The girl looked at her. She had dark eyes, cautious and tired for an 8-year-old. "Mama works at the Dusty Spur," she said. "She told me to wait outside, but I didn't know outside meant this whole street." Eleanor looked up the block toward the far end of town, where the saloon sign swung lazy in the dead air. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Lily." Eleanor extended her hand with the formality of someone speaking to a person of consequence. "My name is Eleanor. I'm also not where I want to be. Would you like company while you wait?" Lily looked at the offered hand for a moment, then shook it. "Okay," she said. They sat together against the hitching post, the widow in her worn black dress, and the girl in her faded blue, while the town moved around them as though they weren't there. After a while, Eleanor noticed Lily had stopped crying. After a while longer, Lily noticed Eleanor was watching the street with the kind of attention most people reserve for places they expected trouble to come from. "What are you looking for?" Lily asked. "A man," Eleanor said. "There's lots of men here. This one's particular." Eleanor paused. "His name is Victor Crane. Do you know that name?" Lily thought about it. "Maybe. Mama talks about lots of men. There's a man who comes on Tuesdays who gives me candy. I don't know if his name is Crane." "That's all right." They were quiet for another stretch. A rider came through at a canter, raising a small cloud of dust. A woman across the street glanced over at Eleanor and then quickly away, drawing her skirts tighter, as though proximity to a woman of uncertain reputation could travel through the air. Eleanor had grown accustomed to that look. When Lily finally spotted her mother coming out of the Dusty Spur and ran toward her, Eleanor stood and watched them reunite, the woman in the doorway crouching to pull the girl close, her expression cycling from fear to relief to a complicated kind of exhaustion. She looked up and caught Eleanor's eye. Something passed between them. Not quite gratitude and not quite kinship, but some acknowledgement of shared ground. Eleanor nodded. The woman Doris, though Eleanor didn't know her name yet, nodded back. Then she took Lily inside and the door closed, and Eleanor turned back to the street. Though she tried the Dusty Spur last, not because she wanted to, but because darkness was coming and the alternatives had been exhausted. The saloon occupied the last building on Main Street, a 2-story affair, with a porch that had been repaired so many times it looked like a quilt. Piano music drifted out along with tobacco smoke and the smell of something fried. The sign above the door, "Dusty Spur Spirits and Lodging," swayed in the first breath of the evening breeze. Eleanor pushed through the swinging doors and the room went quiet. It went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something unexpected walks in. Not hostile, not quite, but the kind of silence that is really just noise holding its breath. Every face turned toward her. Women in bright dresses paused mid-circuit. Card players looked up from their hands. The bartender, a broad man with arms that seemed designed for use in construction rather than hospitality, stopped drawing a beer and held the glass suspended. "Help you, ma'am?" he said. "I need a room for the night," Eleanor said. "This ain't exactly a place for a lady." "I've tried every other place in town," she said. "I can pay." The bartender set down the glass and scratched the side of his neck. Around the room, the silence was doing the things silence does, filling in details, making judgments, rehearsing commentary for tomorrow morning. "Well," the bartender said slowly, "I do got one room available, but there's a complication." "Tell me." "Room's paid for by a fella who's out of town. Comes and goes, been here a few weeks. He ain't due back till maybe tomorrow, maybe day after. You could use it tonight, but if he comes back, you'd have to find other arrangements." "That's fine," Eleanor said. The bartender hesitated. His eyes moved briefly to the room, then back to her. "Room's only got the one bed," he added. The saloon held its breath. Eleanor looked at him steadily. She was tired. She had eaten one biscuit. She had been turned away from 4 establishments by 4 men who had invented reasons to look at her with their noses up, while women like Doris McKenna kept their daughters waiting on sidewalks. She had 11 days of stage road in her bones, and 4 months of grief before that, and a husband who had died in the earth trying to tell someone who would listen. "That's perfect," she said. A low whistle came from one of the tables. The bartender blinked, then smiled just a little. $2, he said. "Room's at the top of the stairs, last door on the right." Eleanor paid, took the key, and climbed the stairs without looking back. The room was plain as promised, a narrow bed, a cracked wash basin, a single window that showed the last bruised light of the desert sunset. Eleanor set her carpet bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself for the first time since Tucson to breathe. She set the leather satchel on the mattress and opened it. Inside was everything she had kept from the 4 months since Daniel's death. His letters, 7 of them, the last dated 2 weeks before the collapse, the ink still clear. Copies of Crane's inspection report obtained through a territorial records clerk she had found willing to accept a small payment for his trouble. A list of names, men who had worked the Silver Crown, and survived men she had spoken to in the weeks after, men who had confirmed what Daniel's letters described. The timbers were rotting. Everyone knew. No one said anything, because no one believed it would matter. Victor Crane had looked at those timbers and signed his name to a document saying they were sound. 11 men. Daniel. Eleanor refolded the letters and laid them back carefully, the way you lay something fragile into the bottom of a box. Then she lay down on the narrow bed, fully dressed, and listened to the sounds of the saloon rising through the floorboards, laughter, a chair scraping the piano starting up again, and thought about the man named Crane who was somewhere in this town living his life, and who did not know she was here. She did not sleep right away. She lay looking at the ceiling and thought about the bitten-down way Doris McKenna had looked at her from the saloon doorway, not hostile, not welcoming, but measuring. The kind of look that has seen things and is deciding whether to trust that you have seen things too. She thought about what the stage driver had told her before she boarded in Tucson, that Coyote Ridge was a town changing shape, that land was moving hands faster than seemed natural, that the sheriff there was a man of influence and uncertain virtue. She thought about Daniel's last letter, the passage she had memorized without trying to. "I am not afraid of the work, Eleanor. I am afraid of the men who decide what the work is worth. There is a difference between a mind that kills you by accident and a mind that kills you by indifference. I believe this mind is the second kind. I am going to say so to the next inspector." She had read those words on the porch of their house in Tucson while the sun went down and the air was still warm, and she had felt something cold come into her chest that had not entirely left since. She was still thinking about it when the door opened. "Yeah." She came upright immediately, not quite startled, more like a person whose alertness never fully fades, and found herself looking at a man standing in the doorway with a lamp in his hand. He was tall, broad through the shoulder in the way of men who work rather than perform it. Dark hair, a week of beard, the kind of face that had been lived in rather than presented. He was carrying his hat in the same hand as the lamp, and he looked at her with an expression of complete, unhurried stillness. He did not seem alarmed to find a woman in his bed. He did not seem alarmed at all, which she found perversely slightly alarming. Barkeep said someone was using the room, he said. His voice was low and even, the kind that carried without pushing. I came back early. Didn't mean to startle you. You didn't startle me, Eleanor said. A pause. Then a brief expression crossed his face that might have been the beginning of something like amusement. I see. He crossed to the small desk in the corner, set the lamp down, and crouched beside the bed frame. He worked his hand into the gap between the frame and the wall and withdrew after a moment a small leather-bound book. Dark cover, no markings. He tucked it inside his coat without looking at it, then straightened. I'll take the chair, he said, nodding toward the one wooden chair by the window. You can keep the bed. That's not necessary, Eleanor said. It is, he said. I sleep light anyway. He settled into the chair with his long legs stretched out and his arms crossed, and his hat tipped forward over his eyes, and within a few minutes his breathing had slowed into something that sounded like sleep. Eleanor looked at him for a moment, this stranger who had walked into his own room and spoken to her as though the situation were unremarkable, who had retrieved something hidden from beneath the bed without explanation, and then offered her the better sleeping arrangement without expectation of thanks. She lay back down. In the morning, she would wake to find him gone and a silver dollar on the desk. She would think about the book he had taken. She would think about the way his eyes had moved in the brief seconds he had been in the room over the satchel on the floor beside the bed, not with greed or curiosity, but with the particular attention of someone who notices things professionally. She would file that away. She had learned in 4 months of trying to find justice for a dead man that information had a way of connecting itself if you let it. Wow. She slept better than she had in weeks, which she could not entirely explain. The next morning, she descended to the saloon in time for the tail end of breakfast, eggs and salt pork, which she ate at a small table near the window, with the methodical attention of someone who understands eating as logistics rather than pleasure. The barkeep watched her with the particular expression of a man who has survived various surprises and is prepared to survive this one too. The man who had the room, Eleanor said, setting down her fork. Does he stay here regular? Off and on, the barkeep said. Couple of months now, comes and goes. What's his name? Hayes. Cole Hayes. The barkeep paused. He's got a ranch outside town, 10 miles or so east. Comes in for supplies for business. Quiet man. Eleanor considered this. What kind of business? The barkeep wiped down the bar with the slow care of a man choosing his words. Cattle, he says. The way he said it suggested he was not entirely convinced of this explanation, but had decided it was not his concern. Eleanor thanked him and went outside. Nat. She found the sheriff waiting for her. He was leaning against the post outside the general store, arms crossed, hat brim level with the sun. He was a big man, broad through the jaw, heavy-handed, the kind of bigness that has been used as argument. His badge caught the light in a way that seemed intentional. Mrs. Marsh, he said, he smiled. I heard we had a visitor. Word traveled fast in small towns. Eleanor had learned this. Sheriff, she said, I don't believe we've been introduced. Dodd, he said, Marcus Dodd. I make it my business to know every soul who passes through this county. He fell into step beside her without being invited, which was itself a kind of statement. I heard you had some trouble finding lodging. I found it at the Dusty Spur. His tone was pleasantly neutral. Now I don't mean any offense, Mrs. Marsh, but a widow traveling alone that causes talk. People in Coyote Ridge are particular about the character of their town. I wasn't aware the character of a town was determined by where its visitors sleep. Dodd smiled, and the smile was the kind that meant he had heard this sort of thing before and found it mildly entertaining. You'd be surprised. I had a word with the Territorial Inn this morning. They've had a cancellation. Might be you'd be more comfortable there. Eleanor stopped walking and looked at him directly. She had dealt with men like Dodd before, men whose power rested on the assumption that the people across from them would not look them in the eye. I appreciate the suggestion, she said. I'll consider it. Good. He tipped his hat. There was something behind the courtesy, a temperature, a warning buried in the pleasant register. I like to think we take care of visitors here. And Mrs. Marsh, I hope whatever brings you to Coyote Ridge resolves itself quickly. We're a quiet town. We like it that way. He turned and walked away, unhurried, nodding to a shopkeeper as he passed. Eleanor watched him go. Then she went to the express office to ask after her husband's cousin James. The clerk shook his head. James Marsh left town 8 months ago, maybe 9. Headed to Colorado, I think. Mining country up there. And that was that. The last thin thread of her former life gone. Eleanor thanked him and stepped back out into the sun. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment still. The satchel was heavy against her ribs. Daniel's letters were in it, and the inspection report and the names. She thought Victor Crane is in this town. She thought Dodd knows I'm here and wants me gone. She thought Cole Hayes had something hidden beneath the bed. Then she started walking because standing still had never gotten her anywhere. Yeah. She found Crane by accident, which was how most things found her. She was in the land office, a narrow room off the main street, presided over by a bored young man with ink on his fingers, asking whether she might look at the public deed records. It was a long shot, a habit from Tucson. She had learned to look at records the way doctors look at symptoms. Patterns emerged if you knew what you were looking for. The young clerk had gone to the back to retrieve the relevant ledgers when the door opened and a man came in. He was perhaps 50, compact with a neat gray beard and the careful dress of someone who wanted to project professional reliability. A pocket watch chain, a collar-pin boots that had been recently polished in the manner of a man who understood that appearance was a kind of argument. He was carrying a sheaf of papers and speaking to the young clerk without appearing to notice Eleanor at all. The survey amendments for the Greer property, he said, setting the papers on the counter. The transfer's been filed, I take it. Yes, sir, yesterday, the clerk said, glancing at Eleanor with sudden uncertainty. And the others, the Henderson parcel. All filed, Mr. Crane. Eleanor was very still. Victor Crane. He was standing 5 feet away from her, consulting papers in a county land office, and he had not looked at her once. She let him finish his business. She let him tuck his papers away and exchange pleasantries with the clerk and reach for the door. She let him nearly leave. Yeah. Then she said quietly, Mr. Crane. He stopped. He turned, and for the first time he looked at her, and she watched him do what people do when they are guilty, a very quick scanning of the face of the person addressing them, looking for recognition, looking for threat. He did not recognize her. She had not expected him to. He had never met Daniel. He had probably never heard the name Marsh. I don't believe we've met, he said carefully. We haven't, Eleanor said. My name is Eleanor Marsh. My husband Daniel Marsh was employed at the Silver Crown mine outside Tucson. A pause, small, almost imperceptible. I'm sorry for your loss, he said. That was a terrible tragedy. Yes, Eleanor said. It was. I was hoping we might speak sometime while I'm in town. Crane's expression rearranged itself into the polished regret of a man who had learned to perform sympathy without experiencing it. I'm afraid I keep a very full schedule, Mrs. Marsh. But if you write to my office— I've written to your office, Eleanor said. 3 times. I'm here in person because writing didn't answer my questions. He looked at her for a moment with something that was almost respect of the way you sometimes briefly respect the thing that is trying to trap you. I'll see what I can arrange, he said, and left. Eleanor watched the door close. Her heart was beating fast, but her face showed nothing. She had found him. She had no idea yet what she would do with that. What the? She was standing outside the general store later that afternoon, checking her list of supplies against the coins in her purse when 3 men stepped into her path. She knew the type before they spoke. She had developed a sense for men who had been sent as opposed to men who had simply arrived. These 3 had been sent. Mrs. Marsh, the largest one said pleasantly. Heard you've been asking around. I've been shopping, Eleanor said. Asking around the land office, asking after Mr. Crane. He moved to block her way when she tried to step past. The sheriff wants to make sure you're comfortable here. He asked us to check in. Tell him I'm comfortable, Eleanor said. Thank you. He was also wondering. The man continued, and his voice had not changed temperature at all, which made it worse. If you might be in the market for some work. There's a place outside town, nice ladies there, good pay, and a widow on her own. She needs prospects. Eleanor looked at him. She was thinking with some distant part of her mind that she was not afraid of men like this. She had been afraid once in the first weeks after Daniel died, when the weight of everything had been enormous, and she had not yet learned that fear, like debt, could be reorganized into something more manageable. What she was feeling now was not fear. It was a very clear, very cold anger. Excuse me, she said and started forward. The second man stepped to block her. Shadow fell across the alley mouth. It came from behind them, a man's voice, quiet and level with a particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are not trying to be heard so much as understood. Cole Hayes stood at the end of the narrow gap between buildings. He was not pointing a weapon. He was not making any gesture of aggression at all. He was simply standing there with his hands loose at his sides, looking at the 3 men with a patient, unhurried attention. Mrs. Marsh, he said, not taking his eyes off the 3 men. Are you all right? Fine, she said. These men giving you trouble. Just having a conversation, the big man said, and the pleasantness had gone out of his voice. Didn't look like a conversation, Cole said. Looked like 3 men standing in a woman's way. He moved not quickly, but with the kind of certainty that doesn't need speed until he was standing beside Eleanor. Gentlemen, I think this conversation is finished. The three men looked at him. They looked at each other. Whatever calculation they were performing ended the way such calculations usually end when the equation shifts unexpectedly. They left. Eleanor watched them go, then turned to look at Cole Hayes. He was looking back at her with an expression that gave away very little, not triumph, not concern, not the pleased helpfulness of a man expecting gratitude, just attention. "They're Dodd's men," he said quietly. "I assumed. Dodd doesn't like loose ends. He has a way of making people move along." He paused. "What did you ask about at the land office?" She looked at him steadily. "Records," she said, "public records." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "You need somewhere to stay while you're in town, somewhere Dodd's men aren't watching. I have the Dusty Spur." "You have it tonight," he said. "Tomorrow they'll find a reason to remove you." He paused. "I have a ranch east of town. I need someone who can keep books. My last hand quit 3 months ago, said it was too lonely out there." Something brief moved across his face. "It's a genuine offer, Mrs. Marsh. You'd have your own room, your own work. Nothing expected of you but what the job requires." Eleanor looked at him. The leather book he had taken from beneath the bed. The way he looked at her satchel without appearing to look at it. The particular brand of quiet that belonged to men who notice things. "Why are you offering?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I've watched Dodd run 3 families off their land in the past 6 months, he said. "And it looks to me like you might know something about the men he's working with." He paused again. "And because you sat with a little girl on the sidewalk for an hour when you had other places to be." Eleanor considered this. "I'll need to stop at the Dusty Spur for my bag," she said. "Of course," Cole Hayes said. They started walking. Behind them, from the shadow of the barbershop, a man who had been watching the exchange turned and walked away quickly in the other direction. The ranch was 10 miles east of Coyote Ridge at the end of a dirt road that wound through country of pale rock and dry grass in the occasional twisted shape of a juniper standing alone against the sky. By the time they arrived, the sun was going orange at the horizon, painting the desert in colors that made everything look briefly more forgiving than it was. The house was small and plain, wood-slatted weathered silver. A porch that had been added after the fact by someone who worked efficiently, if not elegantly. There were fences cattle beyond them, a barn that had been recently repaired on one side. It looked like a ranch that was being kept up by one pair of hands when it needed two. Cole brought the wagon to a stop and helped her down. His hands were careful. "It's not much," he said. Eleanor looked at the valley, at the way the house sat in the fold of the low hills, like something that had chosen its place thoughtfully. "It's exactly what it is," she said. "That's sufficient." Inside smelled of wood smoke, in the particular emptiness of a place where someone lives alone. Not neglect but absence, the way a room holds the shape of habitation without its warmth. There was a stone fireplace, a table with 4 chairs that needed only 2, and shelves along the wall filled with books. Eleanor stopped at the shelves. There were perhaps 40 volumes, some technical engineering manuals surveying tech's a legal digest. Some unexpected, a worn copy of Dickens, 2 volumes of Emerson, a book of Tennyson's poetry that had clearly been read more than once. She looked at him. "Go ahead," Cole said with the faint note of someone who has been judged for this before and has made his peace with it. "I'm not judging," Eleanor said. "My husband kept books. I liked men who kept books." Something moved in Cole's expression at the word liked past tense, the small, ordinary grief of it, and then settled. He showed her the room at the back, narrow bed wash basin, a window that faced east, so she would have morning light. She set her carpet bag on the floor and stood in the center of the small space and felt the strangeness of being somewhere without immediate threat. It was unfamiliar. She was not sure she trusted it yet. But that night, she made supper from what was in the larder beans and cornmeal bread and salt pork. Nothing elaborate, but Cole ate with the focused appreciation of a man accustomed to cooking for himself. Afterward, they sat on opposite sides of the table while the fire burned low, and Eleanor asked about the ranch, and Cole answered in the spare way of someone used to silence, and she thought that this was how 2 people began to learn each other, not in the grand moments, but in the ordinary questions, the way someone passes the salt, the rhythm of a conversation that doesn't need to fill all its space. Then she said, "I need to tell you why I came to Coyote Ridge." Cole looked at her. "He did not say you don't have to. He did not say you can tell me whenever you're ready. He simply waited the way people wait when they understand that some things need space to arrive. She told him about Daniel. Not about the collapse itself. She had told that story too many times and the words had gone formal, with use like a letter copied out too many different times. She told him about the last morning. He left before sunrise, she said. He always did. I was half asleep. He came and stood in the doorway and I could feel him looking at me the way he had a habit of doing, like he was memorizing things. She paused. He said, when I get back, we'll go to the ocean. We talked about it for years, never done it. She looked at her hands. I said, you've been saying that for 3 years, he laughed. He said, this time I mean it. Then he went. She stopped. The fire made small sounds. He'd written me letters, she continued more evenly, about the mine, the timbers, the owner's indifference. He'd written that an inspector was coming. I thought, she stopped again. I thought it would be all right, that someone official would come and see what Daniel saw and act on it. Cole was quiet for a moment. The fire had burned to embers and the room held its orange warmth. I lost my brother, he said, not in a mine, in the war. A pause. He was 22. He used to say the same thing when he came home on leave, that we'd go fishing on the river when it was over. Like the future was a place you could just walk into when you were ready. He looked at the fire. I still think about that fishing trip sometimes. I don't think that goes away. Eleanor looked at him. There was nothing in his face that was performing grief or offering it as gift. It was simply a fact he had put on the table the way you sometimes do with things that cost something to carry. No, she said, I don't think it does. They sat in the quiet for a little while longer. Then Eleanor reached into her satchel and set Daniel's letters on the table. I need to find Victor Crane, she said. I found him today briefly, but finding him and knowing what he did and being able to prove it are 3 different problems. Cole looked at the letters. He had the stillness of a man controlling his reaction. I know that name, he said. Eleanor watched him. How, she asked. He was quiet for a moment. In the dim light, his face was composed, giving nothing away. Because, he said carefully, Victor Crane has been doing property assessments in this county for the past 5 months. He works for Dodd. Technically, he's listed as a private contractor, but his work product always seems to precede a forced sale. Eleanor's hand had gone still on the table. He's not just a mine inspector, she said. No, Cole said. He hasn't been a mine inspector for quite some time. Not since the territory pulled his certification after an inquiry. He paused. An inquiry into the Silver Crown collapse. They pulled his certification, Eleanor said slowly, and then he came here. Where no one knew him, Cole said. Where Dodd needed a man with particular skills, reading land surveys, filing official-looking paperwork, making the transfer of property look above board. Eleanor was very still. She thought about Crane filing papers in the land office that morning. She thought about the name he had spoken to the clerk, Henderson. She thought about Victor Crane, who had signed his name to a document saying those timbers were sound, and who was now doing the same kind of work here with a different kind of signature, but the same fundamental willingness. They're connected, she said. Crane's involvement in the Silver Crown, it wasn't separate from this. Cole looked at her steadily. Tell me what you know, he said. She opened Daniel's letters. Outside, the desert was dark and still, and the stars were very bright, and somewhere in the 10 miles between the ranch and Coyote Ridge, 3 men were riding back toward town to report to a sheriff who did not like loose ends. And Eleanor Marsh, who had been called a widow and a nobody, and a woman who needed to move along, sat at a rough table in the firelight and laid out everything she knew piece by piece, while a man who kept books and said little and noticed everything listened with the particular attention of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. The ranch had a rhythm. Eleanor learned it in the first 3 days the way you learn a new territory, by paying attention without forcing meaning onto things too quickly. Cole rose before dawn, worked until mid-morning, when the heat became serious, came in for a meal, and then to the table where the account books waited. He moved through the property with the economy of a man who knows exactly what each hour is worth and has no intention of wasting them. He did not talk much during the days. Eleanor found she did not mind this. She had spent 4 months in a house full of the silence left by someone's absence. A silence occupied by another person was a different thing entirely. On her second morning, she heard him leave before the sun came up. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sound of his boots on the porch boards, and then the barn door opening, and then nothing. It was the kind of morning that had the particular blue quality of the hour before full light, the desert going from black to gray, to the first pale intimation of color, and she lay there and let herself exist in it without immediately needing to do anything about it. That was new. The impulse to move, to act, to push toward the next thing had been her whole life for 4 months. Lying still felt dangerous in the way that recovery sometimes feels dangerous, like you are letting your guard down, like the moment you stop running is the moment the thing catches up. She lay still anyway. When she came out at the sunrise, Cole was at the corral fence looking at the cattle in the east pasture with the careful assessment of a man doing inventory. He had a cup of something hot in his hand, and he did not turn when she came out onto the porch. "Coffee's on the stove," he said. "Thank you," she said. She went in and poured a cup and came back out and stood on the porch, and they both looked at the cattle in the growing light and did not speak, which felt natural, which was its own kind of unusual. After a while, he said, "Two of the heifers are showing signs of summer illness. I need to separate them today." "Is it serious?" "Manageable. Caught early." He drank his coffee. "The spring survey still needs doing. I keep putting it off." "I can help with that," Eleanor said. "I helped Daniel with survey work a few times. He kept records for the mine and needed the baseline data." She paused. "I'm useful in a field, Mr. Hayes." He looked at her then briefly appraisingly without condescension. "Good to know," he said. He went back to looking at the cattle. Eleanor drank her coffee in the early light and thought, this is a place that has been waiting for something. She could not have said why she thought so. It was not a mystical feeling. She did not incline toward mystical feelings. It was more like a practical recognition, the way you recognize a building that has been maintained by one person when it was built for two, not falling apart, but not quite whole either. She took over the books on the second morning without announcement, simply sat down, opened the ledger, and began working through the columns. The accounts were orderly in the way that things kept by a person with other concerns are orderly, correct in the essential matters, neglected in the finer ones. She found 3 billing discrepancies with the feed supplier in Tucson and noted them on a separate page. Cole came in at midday, saw what she was doing, and put coffee on the stove without comment. They talked about the ranch. They talked about cattle prices and water rights and the spring survey Cole had been meaning to complete on the eastern pasture. They talked about the feed supplier, and Cole confirmed her suspicion that the man in Tucson had been overcharging since a disputed delivery in March, and he had simply not had time to pursue it. "I'll write the letter," Eleanor said. Cole looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I'm offering." He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "Thank you." She thought, the way people who understood each other worked, not with elaborate negotiation about roles and responsibilities, but with the simple identification of what needed doing and who was positioned to do it. She had done this with Daniel in the years when the mine was still a place they were trying to make better rather than a tragedy in progress. She had forgotten what it felt like until just now. In the late afternoon, she walked the fence line on the south side of the property, partly because she had been sitting too long and partly because she wanted to understand the shape of the land. The desert out here was different from the desert visible from the road, more texture, more quiet, the kind of landscape that rewarded time with it. There were quail in the dry grass and a hawk moving in slow circles over the eastern hills, and somewhere below the ridge, a creek that ran only in spring, but whose bed was still visible as a pale thread of sand. She stood at the south fence and looked at the hills and thought about the 15 properties in Cole's leather book. She thought about the railroad right-of-way running through this valley and what it would mean when the trains came, not just for Dodd's scheme, but for everyone here, for the land and the people who had built lives on it and the leaves that would come after. She thought Daniel would have wanted to know this story. He would have wanted to write about it. He had been underneath the practical work of being a mine laborer and a husband, a man who believed in the accountability of things being seen and recorded and said plainly. She had not thought about that in a while. In the months after his death, she had thought mostly about his absence and about justice, which were related but not identical. Now she was thinking about who he had been, the whole of him, not just the part that had died. It felt like something loosening. On the fourth evening, he brought the leather book to the table. Eleanor had been thinking about that book since the night she'd found him in his own room at the Dusty Spur. The way he'd reach for it without hesitation, the practiced ease of it, the sense that it was something he checked on regularly like a wound he was monitoring. He set it open between them. Inside were columns of names, dates, and numbers written in a small, precise hand. Each entry had a property description, a transfer date, and a sale price. Beside each sale price in red ink, a notation FMV, followed by a larger number, fair market value. Eleanor pulled the book closer. The sale prices were consistently significantly below the fair market values. 14 properties, she said, in 8 months. 15 now since the Greer transfer. Cole poured coffee without looking up. The pattern is the same every time. Something goes wrong for the family, a well goes dry, a barn burns, a herd dies. Within a week, a buyer appears. The price is low. The family is scared and needs to move. They sell. And the buyer is always, Eleanor traced the column. Watson Holdings, Cole looked at her, which is Marcus Dodd. Eleanor sat back. She thought about what Cole had told her the night of Daniel's letters about Crane's work here, the property assessments, the official-looking paperwork. She looked at the book at 15 families' hard years reduced to columns. The railroad survey, she said. Cole nodded slowly. I found the maps in the county archive. The proposed rail line from Tucson to the Colorado border runs straight through this valley. All 15 properties are on the right-of-way. He paused. If Dodd holds the land when the railroad comes to buy, he sells for perhaps 10 times what he paid. And Crane does the assessments, Eleanor said, makes the transfers look legitimate, filed by a licensed professional, except he's not licensed anymore. His certification was pulled after the Silver Crown inquiry. Cole turned a page. He's been using a forged credential. I found the original revocation notice in the territory files. Took me 2 months to get a look at it. Eleanor was very still. She thought Victor Crane killed my husband by carelessness or corruption, or both had his license stripped and came here and reinvented himself as a legitimate professional and began doing the same kind of work for a different kind of robbery. She thought this is larger than I understood when I boarded the stage in Tucson. Who knows about this? She asked. You and me, Cole said, and whoever Dodd and Crane are working with at the territorial level. Someone had to ensure the railroad bid request stayed quiet. He closed the book. I've been trying to find that person for 3 months. Eleanor looked at him. Cole, she said, how long have you been doing this? He was quiet for a moment. Since before I came to Coyote Ridge, he said. She waited. He reached into the interior pocket of his coat and laid a card on the table. It was plain pasteboard printed simply Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Below that in smaller type C, Hayesfield Operative. Eleanor looked at it for a long moment. She thought about the way he had moved through the room at the Dusty Spur, the way his eyes had cataloged and noted without appearing to. The books on the shelf surveying texts, a legal digest, the particular brand of quiet. She thought about the first morning at the ranch, finding the coffee already made, realizing he had been up before her for 2 hours and she had not heard him. A Pinkerton agent, she said. Former, he said. The agency contracted me to investigate land fraud in the territory. When my handler was replaced and the official inquiry was closed, Dodd has people in Santa Fe. I stayed on my own account. He paused. The ranch is real, but it's also cover. Eleanor absorbed this. She was not angry exactly. Inago. She understood the mechanics of it, the need for silence, for gradual accumulation of evidence, for not tipping your hand too early. She had done a version of the same thing herself in the land office with Crane. But there was something else. She looked at the book. The night at the Dusty Spur, she said. When you came back for this, you saw my satchel. He did not deny it. I saw it. You knew who I was. A pause. Not at first. In the morning I asked the barkeep. He said a widow from Tucson asking after James Marsh. He met her eyes. I sent a telegram to a contact in Tucson. I got back enough to understand that your husband worked the Silver Crown, that Crane had inspected it. He paused again. I have a notation in this book, Mrs. Marsh, from when I first started tracing Crane's history. It says, Silver Crown Mine, 11 dead, first known instance of Crane's fraudulent inspection work. I wrote the names. Eleanor was very still. Show me, she said. He turned to the back of the book to a page that was different from the others. Not column entries, but a list handwritten 12 names including Daniel Marsh. She looked at her husband's name. Cole let her look. After a while, she said quietly, you knew about me before I arrived. I knew there was a widow who had been trying to get answers about the Silver Crown. He paused. I didn't know you would be on the Tucson stage, and I didn't know you would actually find Crane in the land office on your first day in town. He was there in plain sight. Men like Crane usually are, Cole said. They rely on the assumption that no one is looking specifically for them. Eleanor closed the book gently. She thought about sitting against the hitching post with Lily, and Lily asking what she was looking for, and Eleanor saying a particular man. She thought about the 3 months she had spent in Tucson, writing letters to offices that did not reply, spending money on a lawyer who told her there was nothing to be done selling Daniel's watch to pay for a stage ticket. She thought about what Cole had just told her, that Victor Crane's fraudulent inspection of the Silver Crown was the first known instance. The first, which meant that someone somewhere had decided his loss of certification was not sufficient consequence, and he should be allowed to simply move along and do it again. Who is the person at the territorial level? She said. Who closed the inquiry? Cole looked at her steadily. That's what I've been trying to identify, he said. I have a suspicion, but suspicion isn't evidence. Tell me your suspicion. He was quiet for a moment. The inquiry into the Silver Crown was referred to Judge Harlan Thorne in Prescott. Thorne reviewed the inspector's certification records and ruled that Crane's report was filed in good faith without sufficient evidence to support a finding of negligence. He paused. 6 months later, Thorne's nephew received a very favorable appointment in the Territory Land Office. I haven't been able to draw a direct line, but the timing is suggestive. Eleanor felt the shape of it settling into clarity, the slow, cold clarity she had been building towards since Tucson, since Daniel's letters, since 11 names in a church. If Thorne is involved, she said, we can't bring this to him. No. Who can we bring it to? The federal marshal's office in Prescott, or the press. He paused. There's a reporter from the Territorial Gazette who came to Coyote Ridge last week to do a piece on the railroad survey. He's still in town, name's Aldridge. Eleanor thought about this. We need the families first, she said. The ones who sold. They need to understand what happened to them. They're witnesses. Cole looked at her. There was something in the way he did it. Not admiration exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who has been thinking through the same problems alone for a long time and has suddenly found someone else in the room. The Hendersons are the best place to start, he said. They sold 4 months ago after their well was poisoned. Martha Henderson is not a woman who forgets things. Tomorrow, Eleanor said. Tomorrow. The Henderson farm was 8 miles northwest of town, tucked into a fold of dry hills behind a stand of cottonwoods that had been planted by Martha Henderson's mother 40 years before and were the best thing on the property. The house was small and squared and swept clean, the kind of clean that is itself a statement of intent. Martha Henderson opened the door before they reached the porch. She was a compact woman of perhaps 60, with white hair that she wore braided back, and the hands of someone who had done the same work for many years. She looked at Cole with the neutral recognition of someone who has seen him before. She looked at Eleanor with the sharper attention reserved for the new and unknown. Mr. Hayes, she said. Mrs. Henderson, this is Eleanor Marsh. She's been staying at my ranch. Martha Henderson looked at Eleanor. You're the widow, she said, from the Dusty Spur. That's me, Eleanor said. Something softened in Martha's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of downgrading of caution. Women who stayed at the Dusty Spur were in Martha Henderson's accounting, not necessarily women of compromised character, but women of limited options, and she had a different category for those. Come in, she said. They sat at the kitchen table. Martha made coffee in the fast-practiced way of someone for whom hospitality is a reflex even when circumstances don't fully warrant it. Her husband Bill came in from the back room, older-looking than his wife, with a broken quality around the jaw that Eleanor recognized as the aftermath of physical intimidation. Cole told them what they had. Eleanor watched the Hendersons as he spoke. She watched Martha's hands tighten around her cup and Bill's face go through several expressions and settle finally on a grim, tired anger. When Cole laid the leather book on the table and showed them the entry, Henderson parcel sale price, fair market value notation, Martha sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. I told everyone, she said. I told Bill from the start that well didn't just go dry. She looked at Eleanor. They poisoned it. I have no proof, but I know they did. A well that deep doesn't go dry in a wet spring unless someone helps it. Your testimony, Eleanor said, about the condition of the well before and after the timeline, the appearance of the buyers, that's the kind of thing that builds a case. Who are we building it for? Bill Henderson said. It was not a skeptical question. It was the question of a man who has learned to ask it before committing. A federal marshal, Cole said, and possibly the press. Thorne won't help us, Martha said immediately. Cole looked at her. You know about Thorne. I know he's connected to Dodd. She said it flatly without drama. When I wrote to the court in Prescott about the sale, the coercion, his office replied that the transfer had been filed correctly and there was nothing to investigate. She paused. His clerk misspelled my name. Both times, like I wasn't worth the attention to get right. Eleanor looked at her. She thought about Daniel's letters, the last one. I am not afraid of the work. I am afraid of the men who decide what the work is worth. She thought about Martha Henderson's mother planting cottonwood trees 40 years ago in this dry country because she believed in something worth planting for. Your testimony matters, Eleanor said. What happened to you matters. And I know how it feels to be told that it doesn't, that there's nothing to investigate, that the paperwork is in order, that you should accept what happened and move along. She paused. But there's a pattern here. 15 families, and Victor Crane's name is on every transfer. The same Victor Crane who signed a fraudulent safety report on a mine in Tucson and allowed 11 men to die. She looked at Martha steadily. My husband was one of those men. Martha Henderson set down her cup. She looked at Eleanor for a long time. What do you need from us? She said. Madam. The Clearwater Ranch was 4 miles further north. Pete Clearwater was a younger man than Bill Henderson, early 40s, the kind of lean and weathered that comes from actual ranching rather than the performance of it. His wife had taken their children to her parents in New Mexico after the herd loss. He was managing alone. He listened to Cole and Eleanor without interrupting, which was itself a kind of discipline. When they finished, he said, 30 cattle, overnight. No sickness, signs, no predator marks, just dead. He looked at the middle distance. I'd had a visit from 2 men the week before. Same as what happened to old Greer last week, I figure. Same 2 men, Eleanor asked. Don't know. I didn't open the door the second time they came. He paused. I watched from the window. They stood on my porch for 10 minutes and then rode away. 3 days later, the cattle. He looked at Cole. I've been waiting for someone to come. I wasn't sure you'd come before they moved to the next step. What's the next step? Eleanor asked. Fire, Pete said simply. That's what they did to the Kowalski place. Cole and Eleanor exchanged a look. When? Cole said. 2 nights ago. Pete's voice was flat. Family got out, lost everything else. They're at the church in town. Pastor Reyes took them in. Cole was very still. Eleanor thought Dodd knows we've been to the land office. He knows we've been talking to people. He is accelerating. We need to move faster, she said. We need more, Cole said quietly. What we have is strong, but it's circumstantial on the criminal charges. Dodd can argue the transfers were voluntary. We need something that puts him in direct contact with the coercion. Eleanor thought about Doris McKenna. She had been thinking about Doris since the hitching post, about the way Doris had looked at her from the saloon doorway, measuring tired, holding something back. There's someone I need to talk to, she said. She went to the Dusty Spur alone the next morning. Cole had offered to come. She had said no. There were conversations that needed 2 people and conversations that needed 1, and this was the second kind. Doris McKenna was behind the bar at the quiet morning hour, wiping down the wood with a circular motion that looked reflexive rather than purposeful. Lily was in the back somewhere. Eleanor could hear the occasional scrape of a chair. Doris looked up when Eleanor came in. She stopped wiping. I was wondering when you'd come, she said. Eleanor sat on a stool. You know why I'm here. Doris looked at the door, then back at Eleanor. She set down her cloth. You want to know what I know about Dodd? I want to know what you know about all of it, Eleanor said. Dodd Crane the land. I think you know a great deal. Doris was quiet for a moment. Men talk, she said at last. Men always talk one way or another. They think we don't listen. A pause. Or they think that even if we listen, we can't do anything with what we hear. They're wrong on both counts, Eleanor said. Doris looked at her steadily. My daughter lives here, she said. Lily, you've met her. She paused. I do nothing that puts Lily in danger. You understand that before anything else. I understand, Eleanor said. Doris was quiet for a long time. Eleanor let her be quiet. There was nothing she could say that would make this easier, and she knew better than to try. Then Doris went to the back room and came out with a tin box, the kind used for keeping household accounts. She set it on the bar and opened it. Inside were letters, 8 of them folded and tied with a strip of leather. Crane sends notes to Dodd through here when he doesn't want to be seen going to the jail, Doris said. I don't know why they chose the Spur, maybe because they thought I wouldn't understand what I was looking at. She looked at the letters. I don't have trouble reading. Eleanor looked at the letters without touching them. What's in them? She said quietly. Plans, names, which family is next, which problem needs solving. Doris paused. And one of them mentions a mine in Tucson. She looked at Eleanor. Mentions it as if it was a good example of how to handle a problem. Eleanor's hand was very still on the bar. It mentions my husband, she said. Not a question. Not by name, Doris said, but by mine, Silver Crown. She looked at Eleanor directly. I didn't know what that meant when I first read it, but I kept the letters. I always keep things. A pause. When you came here, the widow from Tucson, I started to understand. Eleanor looked at the tin box. She thought about Daniel, who had written her 7 letters, because he believed that the truth written down and sent to someone who would read it still meant something. She thought about Doris McKenna, who had kept 8 letters in a tin box under a bar in a saloon, because she understood in her bones that there was power in paper. These letters, Eleanor said, combined with our witness testimony, Cole's records, and Crane's forged credential, it's enough, Doris said simply. I think it's enough. A sound from the back room, Lily humming something to herself. Doris listened to it for a moment, her expression complicated. I've thought about this for 2 months, she said, wanting to do something and not knowing how. She looked at Eleanor. And then you walked in here asking for a room and you told that man that's perfect, in a tone of voice that said you meant the exact opposite. And I thought, she stopped. What? Eleanor said. I thought that woman is here for a reason. Doris looked at her. Am I wrong? No, Eleanor said. You're not wrong. Doris closed the tin box and slid it across the bar toward Eleanor. Take it, she said. I'm done keeping their secrets. Bang! She was on her way back to the wagon when she heard the shot. It came from the direction of the spur, not aimed at her, she could tell by the angle, but close enough to scatter a group of sparrows from the roof of the express office and send several people ducking for doorways. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall of the dry goods store, the tin box clutched to her chest. Then Marcus Dodd came out of the jail. He was not running. He walked with the deliberate unhurriedness of a man who controls the environment and wants everyone to know it. Behind him, 2 deputies. Ahead of him, the direction of the shot. Eleanor watched from the shadow of the doorway. Dodd stopped in the middle of the street and looked around with the precise evaluating gaze of a man taking inventory of his territory. His eyes moved over the front of the spur. Then they moved to the wagon parked outside. Cole's wagon. Then they moved to Eleanor. Their eyes met across 30 feet of dusty street. Something settled in Dodd's face, a decision, she thought. The kind a man makes when he has decided that patience has exceeded its useful period. He started toward her. She did not run. Running would be worse, would confirm whatever story he was building, would give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. She held the tin box and she stood straight and she watched him come. He stopped 3 feet away. The deputies flanked him at a distance. Mrs. Marsh, he said, you've been busy. I've been visiting an acquaintance, she said. His eyes dropped briefly to the tin box. What's in the box? Personal items. Mind if I look? I do mind, she said. As you mentioned, and this is a quiet town where people value proper conduct, I assume that includes the privacy of its visitors. Something moved in his jaw. He was, she thought, a man who was more comfortable with frightened people than with people who were not frightened of him, and her steadiness was producing in him a particular kind of irritation. I know what you've been doing, he said quietly, riding around talking to families. Talking to Hayes. The name had an edge to it. I know what Hayes is, Mrs. Marsh. He's not your friend. He's an agent of the railroad come here to make sure their survey goes smooth. Eleanor looked at him. She had not known until this moment that Dodd knew Cole was a Pinkerton, but she held her face still and gave nothing away. I appreciate the warning, she said. Take it seriously. Dodd's voice had dropped to the register used for things that are meant not performed. I've let you ride around because you're a widow and I'm a reasonable pendant and you've been through hardship. But reasonable has a limit, Mrs. Marsh. You'd do well to be on the northbound stage tomorrow morning. He turned and walked away. Eleanor watched him go, and she felt the fear then, not in the moment, but after the way fear sometimes waits for its window. Her hands were shaking slightly against the tin box, and she let them shake. She had 24 hours, maybe less. Ma'am. She was back at the ranch by early afternoon. Cole was in the barn when she arrived. He came out when he heard the wagon, and he read her face before she had climbed down. Dodd confronted you, he said. He knows you're Pinkerton. She set the tin box on the fence rail. He told me you're an agent of the railroad. Is that what they'll say? Cole's jaw tightened. That's what they'll say. It invalidates everything I've found. Makes me look like I'm building a case to benefit the railroad company rather than protect the families. Is it true? Eleanor said. He looked at her. No, I told you the agency closed the official case. I'm on my own account. Can you prove that? A pause. I can produce correspondence that shows the agency closed the case and I continued independently. Whether anyone believes it? He stopped. When they expose you, Eleanor said, the community will turn. The families we've spoken to, they'll wonder. The evidence you collected will be questioned. She looked at him steadily. Your voice can't be the center of this. I know, he said. It has to be mine, she said. He looked at her. You're not from the agency, she said. You're not from the railroad. You're a widow who came here looking for the man responsible for her husband's death and found something larger. There's no conflict of interest in your testimony. She paused. There is in mine. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Eleanor, they will make it as hard as possible for you. Dodd Crane, whoever they have at the territorial level, they will question your character, your motives, your state of mind. They will say you're a grief-stricken woman who has constructed a story from coincidence. I know, she said. You're certain. She thought about Daniel standing in the doorway in the early morning. She thought about the 7 letters. She thought about the cottonwood trees Martha Henderson's mother had planted 40 years ago, and the tin box Doris McKenna had kept under a bar for 2 months, because she was waiting for someone who might know what to do with it. I'm certain, she said. Cole looked at her for a moment longer. In the late afternoon light, his face was open in a way it rarely was. The reserve that was usually there had gone somewhere, and what was underneath was not what she had expected. Not the calculation of a detective assessing an asset, something quieter than that. All right, he said, then let's make sure you have everything you need. The next morning, Eleanor went to see Doris McKenna alone. Cole had offered to come. She had said no. There were conversations that needed 2 people and conversations that needed 1, and this was the second kind. She had been thinking about Doris since the hitching post about Lily and the way Doris had looked at her from the saloon doorway, measuring tired, holding something back. The kind of look that has seen things and is deciding whether to trust that you have seen things too. She walked into town at the hour before the dusty spur opened, when the street was still quiet and the few people out were the ones with early business to attend to. The air was cool. The sky was a flat, pale blue that would burn to white by noon. Doris was behind the bar when Eleanor pushed through the swinging doors, wiping down the wood with a circular motion that looked reflexive rather than purposeful. Lily was in the back somewhere. Eleanor could hear the occasional scrape of a chair, and after a moment humming. Doris looked up when Eleanor came in. She stopped wiping. I was wondering when you'd come, she said. Eleanor sat on a stool. You know why I'm here? Doris looked at the door, then back at Eleanor. She set down her cloth. You want to know what I know about Dodd? I want to know what you know about all of it, Eleanor said. Dodd Crane the land. I think you know a great deal. Doris was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet, Eleanor heard Lily's humming change into something more deliberate, like a child practicing a song she is working on learning. The sound of ordinary childhood, the kind that goes on in the background of everything and does not know it is doing so. Men talk, Doris said at last. Men always talk one way or another. They think we don't listen. A pause. Or they think that even if we listen, we can't do anything with what we hear. They're wrong on both counts, Eleanor said. Yes. Doris looked at her hands for a moment. My daughter lives here, Lily. You've met her. She looked up. I do nothing that puts Lily in danger. You understand that before anything else. I understand her, Eleanor said. She did understand. She understood it the way she understood most things that she had never personally experienced, through the logic of it, through the evidence of it, in someone else's face. Doris was a woman who had built a life in an impossible situation, who had kept her daughter safe and herself functional by learning very carefully what to hold and what to release. The same calculation that had led her to keep the letters in the tin box was the same calculation that had kept her from using them. Something was different now. Doris went to the back room without speaking. Eleanor heard her moving, the sound of a box being shifted, a drawer, a pause. When she came back, she was carrying a tin box, the kind used for household accounts, and she set it on the bar and opened it. Inside were letters, 8 of them folded and tied with a strip of leather. Crane sends notes to Dodd through here when he doesn't want to be seen going to the jail, Doris said. I don't know why they chose the spur. Maybe because they thought I wouldn't understand what I was looking at. She looked at the letters. I don't have trouble reading. Eleanor looked at the letters without touching them yet. What's in them? She said quietly. Plans, names, which family is next, which problem needs solving, which well needs help drying up. Doris paused and something moved behind her eyes. The particular hardness that comes not from cruelty, but from having looked at something ugly long enough that looking at it no longer surprises you, it only makes you tired. And one of them mentions a mine in Tucson, mentions it as if it was a good example of how to handle a problem. Eleanor's hand was very still on the bar. It mentions my husband, she said, not a question. Not by name, Doris said, by mine, Silver Crown. She looked at Eleanor directly. I didn't know what that meant when I first read it, but I kept the letters. I always keep things. A pause. When you came here, the widow from Tucson, I started to understand. I didn't know if you'd be here long enough. I didn't know if you were the kind of person who would... She stopped. Who would what? Eleanor asked. Doris looked at her steadily. Who would stay? She said. Most people don't stay. Dodd runs them off or scares them off or just waits them out. But you said that's perfect in a room full of people waiting for you to be embarrassed, and you went upstairs and slept, and in the morning you were still here. She paused. That's a different kind of person. Eleanor held her gaze. She thought about what it cost to hold something for 2 months in a tin box, waiting for the right person to give it to. She thought about the weight of it, not the physical weight of the letters, but the weight of having knowledge and not being able to use it, of watching things happen and knowing what was underneath them, and being alone with that knowledge in a place where the wrong move could hurt your child. She thought about Daniel, who had written letters no one would answer. She thought about the specific courage of people who keep things. The letters, Eleanor said, combined with our witness testimony, Cole's records, and Crane's forged credential. It's enough, Doris said simply. I think it's enough. Lily's humming from the back room went quiet for a moment, then started up again. Doris closed the tin box and slid it across the bar toward Eleanor. Take it, she said. I'm done keeping their secrets. Eleanor took the box. She held it in both hands for a moment. Thank you, she said. Doris nodded once the way people nod when they are not interested in being thanked for something they should have done sooner and knew it. She picked up the cloth and went back to wiping the bar. Eleanor stood, then stopped. Lily, she said, where will she be tomorrow? Pastor Reyes will take her, Doris said without looking up. I've already arranged it. Whatever happens tomorrow, she'll be at the church. Eleanor looked at her for a moment longer. You've been planning this, Eleanor said. Since you walked in here, Doris said. I was just waiting for you to catch up. She was on her way back to the wagon when she heard the shot. It came from somewhere to the south, not aimed at her, she could tell by the angle, but close enough to send sparrows off the express office roof and put a man outside the barbershop into a fast crouch. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall of the dry goods store, the tin box clutched to her chest, and looked toward the sound. Then Marcus Dodd came out of the jail. He was not hurrying. He walked with the deliberate unhurriedness of a man who controls his environment and wants every witness to know it. Behind him, 2 deputies. He moved in the direction of the shot, did not find anything worth finding, turned and scanned the street with the precise evaluating gaze of a man taking inventory. His eyes moved over the front of the dusty spur. Then they moved to Cole's wagon parked outside. Then they found Eleanor. Their eyes met across 30 feet of dusty street. She did not look away. Something settled in his face in that moment. The decision she had suspected was coming arrived at last. The period of patience was over. Whatever tolerance he had extended to a grieving widow was not something he could afford anymore. He started toward her. She did not run. She held the tin box and she stood straight and she let him come because running confirmed the story he was telling himself about her, and she refused to be a character in that story. He stopped 3 feet away. The deputies flanked him at a distance that was more ceremonial than practical. Mrs. Marsh, he said, you've been busy. I've been visiting an acquaintance, she said. His eyes dropped briefly to the tin box. What's in the box? Personal items. Mind if I look? I do mind, she said. As you mentioned, this is a quiet town where people value proper conduct. I assume that includes the privacy of its visitors. Something moved in his jaw. She had noted by now, a man more comfortable with frightened people than with those who were not frightened of him, and her steadiness was producing a particular flavor of irritation. I know what you've been doing, he said quietly. Riding around talking to families. Talking to Hayes. The name had an edge to it. I know what Hayes is, Mrs. Marsh. He's not your friend. He's an agent of the railroad come here to make sure their survey goes smooth. Eleanor looked at him. She had not known until this moment how much he knew about Cole, but she held her face still. I appreciate the warning, she said. Take it seriously. Dodd's voice had dropped to the register used for things that are meant, not performed. I've let you ride around because you're a widow, and I'm a reasonable man, and you've been through hardship. But reasonable has a limit, Mrs. Marsh. You'd do well to be on the northbound stage tomorrow morning. He turned and walked away unhurried. Eleanor watched him go, and she felt the fear. Then the way fear sometimes waits for its moment delayed until after the confrontation, arriving in the stillness that follows. Her hands were shaking slightly against the tin box, and she let them shake because there was no one to see, and because pretending not to feel things was a habit she was trying to stop. She had 24 hours, maybe less. Cole drew up a timeline, dates, names, incidents, cross-referenced against the ledger entries and Doris's letters. Eleanor organized the documents with the methodical attention she had brought to Daniel's mind correspondence, original copy corroboration where available. The reporter from the Territorial Gazette was staying at the Grand Hotel. They would go to him in the morning before Dodd could move. And if the reporter was not enough, there was still the federal marshal's office in Prescott. But the reporter was the first step, because a story published was a story that could not be unmade, and Dodd's power rested on the town's willingness not to look directly at what was happening in front of it. Eleanor thought this is what Daniel was trying to do. He was trying to make someone look. She was going to make someone look. The lamp burned low. Outside, the desert was dark and still, and somewhere in it, 3 families had lost what their parents had built. And somewhere closer, a man named Crane was sleeping without knowing the night had turned. Cole set down his pen and looked across the table at Eleanor. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you," she said. He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to easy she had seen from him, and it lasted only a moment, but it was enough to make her think that underneath the careful quiet and the years of working alone, there was a person who had not entirely given up on the idea that things could be different. "Good night, Eleanor," he said. "Good night," she said. She went to her room and lay down on the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling, and she thought about 2 tickets to the ocean, and she thought about the fishing trip Cole's brother had never taken, and she thought about all the futures that get deferred and deferred until they can't be deferred anymore. Then she slept, and in the morning everything was going to break open. The morning broke pale and cold over the ranch, the kind of desert dawn that comes in October when the summer heat is gone and the air has the sharpness of something that has remembered itself. Eleanor was already dressed when she heard Cole moving in the main room. She came out to find him standing at the window looking east toward the road. "Riders," he said. She crossed to the window. 2 men on horseback a quarter-mile out, moving at a pace that was not quite urgent, watching the ranch the way you watch something you're deciding whether to approach. "Dodds," Cole said. "They're not coming in yet," Eleanor said. "They're confirming we're here." He turned from the window. "We need to go now, before they send for more." They were on the road to Coyote Ridge within 15 minutes, the tin box in Eleanor's lap, and the leather account book and document folder in the satchel. The 2 riders had pulled back when they saw Cole's wagon moving, which was either reassuring or a sign they were going to report and follow. Cole drove without speaking, and Eleanor did not speak either. There was a quality to the air that needed to be left alone. She thought about what Cole had said the night before: "Your voice can't be the center of this. It has to be mine." She had said it with a certainty she felt, and she still felt it, but it was a different thing to sit with it in the actual morning, with the actual road unrolling ahead and the actual town appearing in the distance. She had a widow's grief, Daniel's letters, Doris's tin box, and her own testimony. That was all. That was everything. She thought it will have to be enough. Yeah. The Territorial Gazette kept a room at the Grand Hotel Room 6, and the reporter's name was Edmund Aldridge. Cole knew this, and Eleanor did not ask how. She was learning not to ask Cole how he knew things, to simply receive the information and use it. They left the wagon at the stable end of Main Street and went through the side entrance of the hotel, which smelled of floor polish and old carpet and the slightly sour air of a building that was maintained without being loved. Cole knocked on room 6, and they waited. Edmund Aldridge was a thin man of about 45, with the faintly startled quality of someone who has spent too many years being woken at unpredictable hours. He came to the door in his shirt sleeves, holding a pen with ink on his left hand, which told Eleanor he had been writing already, despite the early hour. He looked at them. He looked at the satchel and the tin box. He looked very briefly at Cole with the recognition of a man who has heard a name. "Hayes," he said. "Aldridge," Cole said. "See, this is Eleanor Marsh. She has a story that I think you need to hear before you finish your piece on the railroad survey." Aldridge stepped back from the door. They were inside for 40 minutes. Eleanor laid out everything in the order she had organized it the night before Daniel's letters, first establishing the Silver Crown collapse and Crane's inspection. Then Crane's certification revocation, which Cole produced from the Territorial Archive copy. Then the transfer records, the ledger, the pattern across 15 properties. Then Doris's letters, which Aldridge read very carefully twice without speaking. He was a man who understood documents. She could tell by the way he handled them, the slight forward lean, the methodical pace, the occasional small nod when a detail confirmed or extended something he had already suspected. He moved with the specific economy of someone who has learned that information is perishable and must be treated with appropriate care. When he finished with Doris's letters, he set them down and looked at Eleanor. He had the quality of a man who has just revised his understanding of something he thought he already understood. These letters reference the Silver Crown mine, he said. Yes. And they describe it as a successful model. Yes. He stopped. He began again more carefully. Mrs. Marsh, if this is what it appears to be, you understand this is not a local story. This connects to a mine collapse in Tucson, a fraudulent territorial inspector, and a sitting sheriff who is engaged in systematic land theft. He looked at the documents on the table, then back at her. This is potentially a front-page story in papers across the territory, possibly across the country. Good, Eleanor said. Aldridge looked at Cole. Why are you here and not presenting this yourself? You've been investigating this for months. Cole was quiet for a moment. Because Dodd knows who I am. He'll tell people I'm an agent of the railroad, come to clear a right-of-way. It would contaminate everything. He paused. Eleanor has no such conflict. She's a widow who lost her husband in a mine collapse and followed the man responsible for it across the territory. Aldridge considered this with the rapid intelligence of a man who thinks in print. Eleanor had met reporters in Tucson. There was one who had briefly been interested in the Silver Crown before his editor decided the story was too complicated and she had learned to read the type. Aldridge was the real kind. He was not thinking about himself in the story. He was thinking about the story. I'll need time to verify independently, he said. The certification records the transfers. I have contacts at the territorial office in Prescott. How much time, Eleanor said. 2 days, maybe 3. We may not have 2 days, Eleanor said. Dodd is accelerating. The Kowalski family lost their home 3 nights ago. He sent men to watch the ranch this morning. She paused. If we wait 2 days, he may have moved against more families or destroyed evidence. Aldridge looked at the tin box. He looked at the letters again. He was running calculations, the kind that journalists run when they are deciding whether the story they have is complete enough to stand on or whether pursuing completeness risks losing it altogether. One day, he said, I'll file tonight if I can verify enough to stand behind it, and I'll telegraph the federal marshal's office in Prescott directly. He looked at Eleanor. The marshal needs to know about this independent of the story. The story alone doesn't arrest anyone. That's what we need, Eleanor said. She stood. Aldridge stood with her. Mrs. Marsh, he said. One more question. The mine collapse. The 11 men. He looked at her steadily. Are you prepared for what happens when this becomes a story? Your name will be in it. People who want discredit the account will come after your history, your grief, your character. He paused. I'm not asking to discourage you. I'm asking because I want to know what I'm working with. Eleanor looked at him. She thought about 4 months of letters to offices that did not reply. She thought about the lawyer who said there was nothing to be done. She thought about Daniel standing in the doorway and promising the ocean and going into the earth and not coming back. My character can stand the attention, she said. Print the story. They were crossing the hotel lobby when the door opened and Marcus Dodd walked in. He was alone, which was either a gesture of confidence or carelessness. Eleanor thought confidence. He was dressed with the particular care of a man who has made a decision about how things are going to go and has prepared for it. He stopped when he saw them. The lobby was not large. It held 4 chairs, a rug, and the desk clerk who had the intelligent instinct of someone who understood when to find something urgent in another room and did so. Mrs. Marsh, Dodd said. His voice had the quiet of something that had arrived at his conclusion. Mr. Hayes, he glanced behind them. Paying a call on the press. Just checking the stage schedule, Cole said. Dodd smiled without warmth. I know you were upstairs with Aldridge. He looked at Eleanor. I told you yesterday. You've used up my patience. I heard you, Eleanor said. Then you know what comes next. I know what you'd like to come next, Eleanor said. But I think you've miscalculated. Dodd looked at her with the expression of a man who has not been surprised in some time and does not expect to start. Have I, he said. You've spent 8 months operating on the assumption that the families you displaced were too frightened and too scattered to coordinate, Eleanor said. That's mostly true. You've also operated on the assumption that anyone who came looking at your methods could be dismissed as a railroad agent or a troublemaker or a grief-addled widow. She looked at him steadily. That assumption is the miscalculation. Dodd's expression had not changed, but something behind it had. Whatever you think you have, he said, I assure you it won't. Victor Crane's certification was revoked in 1883, Eleanor said, by the Territorial Board following an inquiry into the Silver Crown mine collapse. He has been filing fraudulent property assessments in this county for 5 months. Every transfer he's certified is invalid. Watson Holdings, your company, acquired 15 properties on the basis of those invalid assessments. She paused. And we have correspondence in your name directing Crane to use the Silver Crown situation as a reference for how to manage the Tucson property owners. She let that land. Good morning, Sheriff Dodd. She stepped past him. Cole stepped past him. Dodd stood in the lobby with his face very still, and Eleanor walked out into the morning sun without looking back. The next 18 hours were the longest she had spent since the days following the mine collapse. They returned to the ranch, which felt like the right place to wait territory. They understood enough distance from town to see approach enough work to keep the hands busy and the mind from spiraling. Eleanor reorganized the document copies for the third time. Cole repaired a section of fence with the focused efficiency of a man who needs something physical to do. In the afternoon, Pete Clearwater rode in from the north. Word's going around town, he said, climbing down from the saddle. Dodd's telling people Hayes is a railroad agent, that the widow from Tucson is working with him to clear the land for the rail company. He looked at them both. Some people are listening. Eleanor had expected this. The Hendersons, she said. Martha isn't listening, Pete said. In my opinion. Neither am I, but some of the families who didn't get visited by Dodd's men yet, they're nervous. They should come here tonight, Eleanor said. Everyone who's willing, bring what they have. Receipts, letters, anything that documents what happened to them. Pete looked at Cole. Cole looked at Eleanor. All right, Pete said. By evening, the ranch held more people than it had probably ever held. The Hendersons came, Bill and Martha, Pete Clearwater, and 2 of his neighboring ranchers. A family named Ruiz, whose water had been diverted 3 months ago. A man named Aldama, who had lost his southern 40 acres and was still not entirely sure how it had happened. Eleanor stood in the main room of the small house and looked at the people crowded into it. Ranchers' families, people who had come from outside Coyote Ridge with their lives built and then damaged by the same methodical, confident corruption. And she felt something that was not quite hope and not quite grief, but lived in the space between them. She told them what they had. She told them what Aldridge was doing and what the federal marshal's office might do and what might happen and what might not. She did not soften anything. She had found in 4 months of dealing with people who softened things that honesty was more useful than reassurance. There's a risk, she said, if Dodd moves against any of us in the next day or two, against the ranch, against anyone here, it gets more complicated. We're trying to move faster than him. Martha Henderson looked around the room. We're already here, she said. We already lost things. What else is there to be afraid of? No one answered. The night settled in. People ate what they had brought and drank Cole's coffee and talked in the way that people who have been isolated by the same disaster talk when they finally find each other, with the specific relief of being believed, of having someone else confirm that what happened to you was real and not merely your perception. Cole moved quietly through the room, refilling cups, listening at the edges. Eleanor watched him and thought about what he had said. I know what it's like to be out of place, to have people decide before you open your mouth. She thought about a man who read poetry and kept detailed records in a small leather book, and had stayed in a place 3 months past the point when the agency abandoned it because he did not like what was happening to people who had no one looking out for them. She thought, this is who he is. She thought, I would like to know more of who he is. The telegram arrived the next morning. Not to the ranch, to Pete Clearwater, who came riding in at a near gallop just after sunrise, his horse raising a rooster tail of dust on the road. Aldridge sent word, he said, breathing hard. The federal marshal out of Prescott is coming today. He's already on the road. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. And Crane, Pete said, and something in his voice made her open them. Crane went to Aldridge last night, on his own. Cole was very still beside her. Why, Eleanor said. Because, Pete said, he read what Aldridge had. He knew the story was going to run. He looked between them. Crane offered to testify against Dodd, full statement, in exchange for consideration on his own charges. The morning was very quiet for a moment. Eleanor thought about Victor Crane, the compact, careful man in the land office, the one who had looked at her with something almost like respect for the trap she was setting. She thought about the fundamental equation of men like Crane. They were not true believers in anything. They were hired logic, and when the logic changed, they recalculated. Dodd had offered Crane protection. The protection had evaporated when Eleanor walked into the Grand Hotel with a tin box. He'll testify to what Cole said. Everything, Pete said. The silver crown, too. He says Dodd knew about the mine before he hired Crane here. That the silver crown was... Pete looked at Eleanor and stopped. Tell me, she said. He says the silver crown was a test case. That Holloway, the mine owner in Tucson, was connected to men in the territory who were planning the land scheme here. That the mine inspection was the first time Crane did this kind of work. It was deliberate, Mrs. Marsh, not carelessness. He was told what the report needed to say. The world went very still. Eleanor stood in the dusty yard of the ranch in the morning light and absorbed this. Not carelessness, not indifference. Deliberate. Daniel had been deliberately sacrificed. A test, a proof of concept. 11 men, including the one who stood in the doorway in the early morning and promised her the ocean. She was aware of Cole standing beside her, very close, not touching her. She was aware of Pete on his horse watching her with the particular gentleness of a man who has just told someone something terrible and knows it. She breathed. She breathed once and then again. Then Crane testifies, she said, and so do I. Marshal Harker arrived in Coyote Ridge at 2 in the afternoon on a gray horse with the compact efficiency of a man who has driven hard and arrived ready. He was accompanied by 2 deputies from Prescott and an attorney from the Territorial Solicitor's Office who had come at Aldridge's insistence. They did not go to the sheriff's office. They went to the Dusty Spur where Doris McKenna opened her bar in the afternoon as usual, and where an hour before the marshal arrived, the following people had gathered: Eleanor Marsh, Cole Hayes, Pete Clearwater, Martha and Bill Henderson, the Rugies family, Dama and Doris herself, who had sent Lily to Pastor Reyes's house for the day and had put on a dress she saved for occasions of importance. When Marshal Harker walked in, he looked at the assembled group and then at Aldridge, who stood by the window with his notebook. I read your telegram, the marshal said to Aldridge, and the one from the Pinkerton contact in Santa Fe. He looked at Cole. And I've been informed that Victor Crane is at this location and wishes to make a voluntary statement. Crane was sitting at a table at the back of the room. He had the look of a man who has made his calculation and is living with it, not comfortable, not peaceful, but resolved. He met Eleanor's eyes briefly when she came in. She looked at him for a moment. She thought this man signed his name. He had a pen and a form, and he signed his name, and 11 people died. And now he will save himself by finally telling the truth, because it is the only remaining option that benefits him. She did not forgive him. She did not think she was supposed to. But the truth coming from him was still the truth. The proceedings took 4 hours. Crane went first. He spoke for nearly 2 hours in the careful, bloodless language of a man who has thought through his testimony in advance and stripped it of anything that was not legally useful. He described the Silver Crown inspection, the pressure from the mine owner, the payment he had received, the report he had written, knowing it was false. He described the conversation he had with the mine owner 30 days before filing the report, in which the owner had made clear that the expected outcome was certification and that there would be consequences otherwise. He described coming to Coyote Ridge, the arrangement with Dodd, the 15 property transfers. He described the methodology: identify families, introduce a problem, a poisoned well, a diseased herd, a fire. Wait for desperation, appear with an offer. He named the man at the territorial level who had closed the Silver Crown inquiry, not Judge Thorne himself, but Thorne's senior clerk, who had handled the review and ruled in exchange for a sum of money he described in specific memorized amounts. He named the connection between the mine owner in Tucson and the railroad interests that had backed Dodd's scheme, not just the local railroad survey, but a larger network of land acquisition across 3 territories that had been operating for 5 years. He was thorough. He was organized. He was, Eleanor thought, a man who had been planning this exit strategy since the moment she had said his name in the land office and he had looked at her face. When he finished, the attorney from the solicitor's office had pages of notes. Marshal Harker's expression was the composed mask of a man who is storing his reactions for later. Then Crane stopped speaking and sat back. Marshal Harker looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Marsh, he said, the agency has been informed of your investigation. I understand you have documentation. Eleanor stood. She laid out the documents one by one: Daniel's letters, the inspection report, the ledger, Doris's letters, and she spoke about each of them in the plain, careful voice she had been practicing in her head for 4 months. She had thought about what kind of testimony would be most effective and had decided on directness rather than drama. She was not here to perform grief. She was here to provide evidence. She spoke about Daniel. She told them about the 7 letters, not reading from them, but describing them, their dates, their contents, the arc of a man's understanding of what was happening around him. She described the last letter, his belief that an inspector was coming, his hope that someone with authority would see what he saw. She described Victor Crane's inspection. She laid the inspection report on the table and spoke about what it certified versus what Daniel's letters described. She laid Crane's certification revocation notice beside it and gave the date. She spoke about the 4 months after Daniel's death. She spoke about the letters to the territorial office, the lawyer, the records clerk who had finally given her access to the files. She spoke about the stage from Tucson and arriving in Coyote Ridge and finding Crane in the land office on her first morning and the work of the past 2 weeks. She spoke about the tin box. She spoke about Doris McKenna, who had kept 8 letters for 2 months in a place where they could not be found, who had waited for someone who would know what to do with them, who had sent her daughter to the pastor's house before coming to today's proceedings, because she understood that what she was doing had consequences and had decided to do it anyway. She spoke about the Hendersons and the Clearwaters and the Ruiz family and the Aldama family and the 11 others in Cole's ledger whose land had been taken from them. She said Daniel's name last. She said it quietly without ceremony, just as a fact among other facts. Her husband's name, his occupation, his mind, the date of the collapse, the date of the report that preceded it. The room was very quiet when she finished. Doris McKenna, sitting in the corner with her hands in her lap, was looking at her own hands. Martha Henderson had her jaw set. Cole was looking at the table. Aldridge was writing. Marshall Harker looked around the room for a moment. Then he picked up the first of Doris's letters and read it. Then he said, "I've heard enough to proceed." Dodd's arrest was not dramatic. The marshal and his deputies went to the jail. Dodd was there because he was a man who believed until the last moment that the structures he had built around himself were solid. When Marshal Harker read the federal warrant, Dodd looked at it with the expression of a man who is recalculating in real time and finding the numbers unworkable. He did not resist. There was nothing operatically satisfying about it. No final defiant speech, no drawn weapon, no theatrical moment of recognition that the widow had outmaneuvered him. He simply stood in his jail and put his hands out. It was the most honest moment Eleanor had ever seen him perform. The deputies led him out through the front door of the jail, which meant through Main Street in the afternoon when the town was at its most populated. People stopped what they were doing. Storefronts went quiet. Eleanor stood on the opposite sidewalk beside Cole and watched it happen. She did not feel triumph. She had not expected triumph. What she felt was more like the specific relief of a thing long deferred, finally arriving the way a rain feels after weeks of waiting for it. Not joyful exactly, but real substantial. A physical fact against the skin. Martha Henderson was standing 2 doors down with her arms crossed, watching with the expression of a woman who has been proven right about something she would have preferred to be wrong about. Bill Henderson was standing beside her with his hand on her shoulder. Pete Clearwater was there. Aldama was there. The Ruiz family stood together, babe. The children confused the parents with expressions Eleanor recognized as the specific combination of relief and exhaustion that comes after a long period of maintained fear. Doris was not there. She had gone back to the Dusty Spur where Lily was waiting and would hear about it later in the way of women who have done their part and don't need to be present for the ceremony. The street was very quiet as the deputies walked Dodd to the Prescott stage. Then Pete Clearwater said something low to the man beside him, and the man let out a long breath, and someone else said something that Eleanor couldn't hear. And after a while, the street found its voice again, not with celebration, but with the resumption of ordinary life, which is itself a kind of victory. Cole stood beside Eleanor and did not speak. She did not need him to speak. His presence was its own language by now, the specific quality of a person who understands that some moments do not need words added to them. After a while, she said, "What happens to Crane?" "Reduced sentence," Cole said. "He'll face criminal charges still. The cooperation doesn't absolve him, just limits the consequence." Eleanor nodded. She had made her peace with this in the days of planning. Victor Crane was not going to face the full weight of what he had done to Daniel and the others. He was going to face some of it, which was more than he had faced before. She had decided that some was not nothing and that it was enough to proceed. She thought about Daniel, who had been a man who believed in proportionate things in doing the work you could do, not despairing about the work you couldn't. She thought that he would have understood this. She was not sure she had fully understood it until now. Men. That evening, after the proceedings had concluded and the marshal's party had left for Prescott, With Dodd and the documents, Eleanor went alone to the edge of town. There was a place she had noticed in her first days in Coyote Ridge, a small flat ground east of the church. Not quite a cemetery where several marker stones stood without formal arrangement. The miners who had died in accidents over the years, the traveling men who had no family to claim them, the unclaimed and the unplaced. She stood among the markers in the evening light and read the names on the ones that had names. There was no marker for Daniel here. His grave was in Tucson in the churchyard near their house, with a stone she had ordered herself and paid for by selling his surveying instruments. She would go back to Tucson. Eventually, there were things to settle there, the house to determine what to do with the ongoing civil claim that needed attention. But she stood here tonight because she needed to stand somewhere that acknowledged the weight of it. She thought about the men who had died in the Silver Crown. She thought about their names, which she had said into the official record today. She thought about the way names work, the way saying them is itself a kind of action, a refusal to let a person be only a number in a report. She stood until the last of the light was gone and the stars came out, which in the desert came out with a particular abundance of places far from cities. She stood and looked at the sky and thought about Daniel, not the way she had been thinking about him for 4 months, as loss as grievance, as the origin of a mission, but simply as himself. The man who stood in the doorway in the early morning. The man who read the newspaper spread wide like he was giving the newsroom to breathe. The man who promised the ocean. She thought you would have liked Cole Hayes. He is a man who keeps records and reads poetry and stays past the point where staying is easy. You would have trusted him and you would have been right to. She thought I am going to be all right. Not in the way of someone who says it to perform recovery, in the way of someone who has looked at the evidence and arrived at the conclusion. After a long time, she walked back to the ranch where the lamp was on in the kitchen window, and Cole was making coffee, and she came in and sat down at the table and let the warmth of the room settle around her, like something she was learning to accept without question. Under the headline, Coyote Ridge Sheriff arrested on charges of fraud and coercion. 15 families to receive restitution. Below it, in slightly smaller type, widow's testimony connects scheme to 1883. Mine collapse. Crane cooperates with territorial investigation. Eleanor read it sitting at the kitchen table in the ranch with Cole's coffee going cold beside her and the morning light coming through the east window the way it had done every morning for the past 3 weeks. She read it once through and then she set it down and looked at the wall for a while. Cole was outside. She could hear him moving in the yard. She thought about Daniel reading the newspaper on Sunday mornings, the way he held it spread wide like he was giving the newsroom to breathe. She thought about how she had always meant to tell him she liked watching him read and had somehow never said it because she had assumed there would be time. She thought there is no more of that kind of assuming left in me. There was a different kind of time now. Not the vast deferred time of before when the future was always somewhere ahead and the present was merely the corridor to it. This was the time of things that had actually happened and things that were actually happening and choices made with open eyes. She picked up the newspaper and folded it carefully and put it in the leather satchel with Daniel's letters. Then she went outside. A week after Dada's arrest, the territorial court issued a preliminary finding that all 15 property transfers were invalid. The families would be notified, the lands would be reviewed. Nothing would be simple or fast land. The law rarely was, but the mechanism had been set in motion, which was what mechanisms needed to move. Judge Thorne's senior clerk resigned from his position without explanation. Thorne himself was summoned to Prescott for questioning the outcome of which would take months to determine. Victor Crane's testimony was entered into the territorial record. His certification was permanently revoked, which had already happened once before, but this time would be accompanied by a criminal record that would follow him. The consideration he received was a reduced sentence, not absolution. Eleanor did not think about Victor Crane very often. She thought about Daniel. On the morning 3 weeks after Dodd's arrest, Eleanor was in the kitchen making breakfast when Cole came in from outside with something in his hands. He set 2 pieces of paper on the table. She looked at them. Train tickets, Tucson to San Diego. She looked at him. He was standing on the other side of the table with his hat in his hand and his face doing the thing it did when he had something to say and was making room for it. The ranch will keep, he said. Pete's offered to watch the cattle. Eleanor looked at the tickets. She looked at the window at the dry hills going gold in the morning light. She thought about Daniel standing in the doorway promising the ocean and the way she had said half asleep, "You've been saying that for 3 years." She thought about the things that don't get done and the things that do. She picked up the tickets. They were dated for Friday, which was 4 days away. He had bought them before asking her, which was either presumptuous or the act of a man who had decided to believe in something rather than hedge against it. She thought she liked the second reading better. "The ocean," she said. "The ocean," he said. She looked at him across the table, this complicated, quiet man who kept books and records and had stayed in a place long past reason because he did not like what was happening to the people in it, who had sat beside a fire and put the truth of his grief on the table without making it a performance, who had bought 2 train tickets and stood there with his hat in his hand waiting. "All right," she said. She didn't say it the way she had said it the first time, alone and tired in the dusty spur with a room full of eyes on her. She said it in the way of someone who knows exactly what they're saying and means all of it. Cole set his hat on the hook by the door. Then he sat down at the table and picked up a cup of coffee and looked out the window at the morning. And Eleanor sat across from him and did the same. And the ranch was quiet around them with the particular peace of a place that has been through something difficult and has come out the other side still standing. Weird. Later that day in the mid-afternoon, Eleanor walked to where the desert opened up east of the ranch. She brought Daniel 7 letters and a piece of ground she had prepared near a juniper that had been growing there longer than anyone in the county could remember. She did not bury the letters. She read them one more time, all 7 in order, sitting against the juniper with the sun on her face. She read them the way you read something you are memorizing for good before releasing it so the words go into you and stay there after the paper's gone. Daniel's last letter ended the way it always had. "I am not afraid of the work, Eleanor. I am afraid of the men who decide what the work is worth. There is a difference between a mind that kills you by accident and a mind that kills you by indifference. I believe this mind is the second kind. I am going to say so to the next inspector. I am going to keep saying it until someone listens. I love you. We'll go to the ocean when I get back." She folded the letters and held them for a while. Then she opened the satchel and placed them inside carefully, along with the Gazette article and the copy of the Territorial Court's preliminary finding and a small card she had written in her own hand. "Daniel Marsh, Silver Crown Mine. Told the truth. Was heard." She would keep them with her. She had decided that too. The night before they left for San Diego, Lily came to the ranch with Doris. Doris had found a new arrangement for the Dusty Spur, a partnership with the barkeep that gave her ownership of the upstairs rooms and the liquor license, but not the obligations of the working hours. She told Eleanor with a satisfaction she made no effort to conceal, going to make the upstairs into an actual lodging house. "Clean rooms, reasonable rates. For widows traveling alone," Eleanor said. "For anyone who needs one," Doris said. Lily sat at the kitchen table and ate cornbread and looked around the ranch house with the comprehensive attention of a child cataloging a new environment. She looked at the bookshelves for a long time. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "did you read all of these?" "Most of them," Cole said. "My mama can't read very well," Lily said. Not sadly, just factually. "She's learning." "There are good books for learning," Eleanor said. "I'll find some and send them when I'm back." Lily looked at her. "Where are you going?" "To the ocean," Eleanor said. Lily considered this with the gravity of someone for whom the ocean was a theoretical concept. "Is it far?" "Fairly far," Eleanor said, "but not too far to come back from." Lily looked at Cole. "Will you come back too?" "That's the plan," Cole said. Lily nodded, satisfied, and returned to the cornbread. Doris met Eleanor's eyes across the table, and something passed between them. Not the measured assessment of the hitching post, not the careful offering of the tin box in the bar. Something easier. Something that looked like the beginning of a friendship between 2 women who understood that certain kinds of ground had to be walked alone before you could choose to stop. "Come back," Doris said. "We will," Eleanor said. The stage to Tucson left at first light. Eleanor was the first one at the wagon. The morning was cold, the sky still dark at the edges and pale blue overhead, and the desert had that particular quality it had only for the first minutes of dawn. Every rock and juniper sharpened to itself shadow and light, with nothing blurred between them. Cole came out of the house with 2 bags and locked the door and stood on the porch for a moment looking at the ranch. Eleanor watched him do it the way a man looks at something he has built or kept up, or simply remained committed to through seasons of difficulty. "Ready?" she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. They drove to the stage office in the early morning quiet, the horse's breath making small clouds in the cold air. The dirt road unwinding pale and certain ahead of them. Coyote Ridge was still mostly asleep when they passed through the church dark, the stores shuttered, the Grand Hotel, with its faded facade and sagging porch. Eleanor looked at it as they passed. She thought about the stagecoach arriving 11 days ago, and the town that had looked back at her like something deciding whether to fear. She thought about the 4 boarding houses that had turned her away, and the saloon at the end of the street with its crooked sign, and the barkeep who had said "your funeral, ma'am," and meant it as a courtesy. She thought about standing in the room with one narrow bed and a cracked window and saying "that's perfect" with an audience of strangers and a heart that was so tired of performance it had simply stopped. She thought something happened here. She thought, "I will carry it with me, and it will not be the same weight as grief." The train from Tucson to San Diego took 22 hours. They sat across from each other for the first part of it, which seemed right. 2 people who had been across a table from each other more than they had been beside each other, learning what that looked like in a different kind of light. Cole had brought Tennyson, which Eleanor found slightly improbable given the circumstances. She had brought nothing to read, so he gave her the book, and she read while the desert turned to mountain, and the mountain turned to something else entirely. At some point in the long afternoon, she fell asleep and woke to find her head had been resting against the window, and Cole had rearranged the situation so there was a folded coat between her head and the glass. He was looking out the other window with the book in his hands, not reading. She didn't say anything. She went back to sleep. When she woke the second time, it was dark outside, and the train was descending toward the coast, and the air had changed something in it that was different from dry country air, a weight and a softness, and the faint beginning of a smell that was nothing she could name, but that she knew immediately was the thing Daniel had been promising. She sat up. Cole was watching her. "We're almost there," he said. She looked out the window at the darkness rushing past and thought she could see or imagine she saw the place where the black of the land ended and the black of the water began. "Yes," she said. They saw the ocean at dawn. It was not what she had imagined, which was somehow better. She had imagined something large, something overwhelming, something that would feel like an ending or a resolution. What it was simply enormous and simple, gray and green and vast, with the sun coming up somewhere behind them and painting the water in horizontal bands of gold. She stood on the wooden pier and looked at it. Cole stood beside her. She thought about Daniel's last letter. She thought about the ocean he had promised. She thought about the difference between keeping a promise yourself and carrying it for someone who can't. She thought both count. She breathed the salt air and let the sound of the waves be what it was. Not a metaphor, not a symbol, not the ocean of her grief or her endurance or her long survival. Just the ocean, just the actual ocean, large and cold and indifferent, in the best way unconcerned with the small, difficult lives on its shore. "Daniel would have liked this," she said. Cole was quiet for a moment. "Then I think he would have." She stood there until the sun was fully up and the light on the water had moved from gold to white, and the pier was beginning to fill with the morning's people, fishermen, a couple walking a dog, children in high spirits ahead of their parents. Then she turned. Cole was looking at her in the way she had learned to recognize the way he had in the hotel lobby when she'd said what she knew to find, when she'd said "it has to be mine," a particular quality of attention that was not scrutiny, but something more like recognition, as though he were watching a person be fully what they were and finding it exactly right. She looked back at him. There are moments, she had learned, that do not arrive with fanfare. They arrive in the plain light of an ordinary morning on a pier by an ocean between 2 people who have been through the same fire and come out changed. They don't announce themselves. They simply are. "We should find somewhere for breakfast," she said. Cole smiled, a real smileful this time, the kind she had seen only a few times but was learning to expect. "We should," he said. She tucked her arm through his, which was the first time she had done that, and it felt like the easiest thing she had done in a long time. They walked off the pier together into the bright coastal morning, and the ocean kept moving behind them the way it always had and always would, indifferent and enormous and perfect. Months later, Cole's ranch east of Coyote Ridge had fields beginning to green, not a transformation, but a beginning, the way first things begin, slowly and without announcement. The eastern pasture had been surveyed at last. The spring had been reliable. The household accounts were in excellent order. The people of Coyote Ridge called her the widow who brought the sheriff down, which was not quite accurate, but not quite wrong. Eleanor had found she did not mind what people called her, as long as it was people she could look in the face. She wrote letters to Martha Henderson, to Pete Clearwater, to Doris McKenna, whose lodging house had its first proper review in the Gazette. She wrote letters to a lawyer in Tucson who was helping the Silver Crown families pursue a civil claim against the estate of Aldous Webb, the mine owner. She wrote to the territorial court about the restitution process for the 15 families. She wrote sometimes just to write, putting words on paper because it was how you made things real, How you said I was here and this happened and it mattered. Cole read to her in the evenings, which she had not asked for but had not discouraged. He read badly at first, self-conscious about it, and then with more ease as the evenings accumulated. She liked the sound of his voice in the quiet rooms. She liked the particular way the house felt occupied by two people rather than one. Lily sent letters asking about the ocean. Eleanor answered everyone. One night, lying in the room that had been hers since the first week at the ranch, the east window open to the night air. Eleanor lay looking at the ceiling and thought about the very first night she had been in this territory, the dusty spur, the narrow bed, the room full of people waiting for her to be ashamed. She thought about saying, "That's perfect," to a room full of strangers, and meaning the opposite in the same thing simultaneously, the defiance and the exhaustion, and the strange specific decision to stop being afraid of what people thought of her survival. She thought I was telling the truth. I just didn't know it yet. In the morning, there would be the accounts to update, and a letter to write to Pete about the spring water rights, and a book Lily had asked about that Eleanor needed to find. In the morning, there would be the ordinary work of the ordinary life that she had come to understand was not ordinary at all, but was in fact the most remarkable thing she had ever built. She had built it from 11 dead men and 7 letters in a tin box in a night in a saloon where she refused to be embarrassed. She had built it by looking at things directly and saying what she saw. She had built it in the company of a man who read Tennyson and kept careful records and understood more than most that some fights were worth staying in even after the official case was closed. She looked at the ceiling, and she thought about the ocean, and she thought about Daniel, and she thought about the word perfect, and she smiled. And then she slept, and she did not dream of anything dark.